Well, hello everyone. I'm Liz Eggleston and I run Course Report, which is a resource for students who are choosing a coding bootcamp. If you haven't looked at Course Report yet, this is my one shameless plug. I do it in all of our videos, but you can use our directory to find schools that fit your learning style. You can check out our blog for interviews with students and instructors like this one and founders at bootcamps around the world. We've got application tips and virtual classroom tours. So much content there to help you make your decision. So today, Philip Troutman is here from Codesmith, which is a coding bootcamp in California and New York. And of course, they have an online bootcamp as well. You may recognize Philip from a video that we did a few months ago about Codesmith's remote classroom. And in that video, we talked about the 150 hours that are dedicated to lectures and exercises and curriculum for the career search at Codesmith. So today, we're going to dive in a little bit further into that career curriculum and the other ways that Codesmith is getting their alumni the outcomes that they're kind of known for these days. Most recently, Codesmith reported that 87% of their graduates get full-time software engineering jobs within 6 months with an average salary of $115,000 a year, which is definitely on the higher side. So Phil, thank you so much for being here. I have a bunch of questions for you, but let's start high level. So what is the goal for a Codesmith student? Obviously, every bootcamp wants to get their students employed, but what's the specific goal for y'all at Codesmith?
Obviously, the goal of any resident is to get a great role as a software engineer somewhere. But to answer it a bit deeper, and in a bit of a deeper sense, I would first say that, the residents from Codesmith come from a lot of different professional backgrounds. Some are previous engineers or engineering adjacent roles like design or data analytics or something along those lines. Some are graduates from other programs, and some are just, a lot are just extremely dedicated self-learners. But I would say that they all have the common goal of transitioning into or kind of upskilling within a very lucrative field that has a lot of opportunities and that they can feel fulfilled in whatever way that ends up looking for that particular individual. And I think that's one of the big reasons why software is such an attractive industry, because you can literally do it in any industry. If you are interested in music, if you're interested in finance or real estate or literally anything, you can find a software engineering role within that industry that you're passionate about. It's really a pretty extraordinary thing, actually.
At most boot camps, we kind of expect folks to go into junior, like entry level roles. Mm-hmm. Is that the goal at Codesmith, or do y'all want your graduates to go into more senior roles?
Yes, that is the overarching goal for residents at Codesmith, is to move into not just those entry or junior level roles, but those more mid and senior level roles. Absolutely.
And you talked about your residents, you'll call your students residents. Yeah. You talked about your residents having different professional backgrounds and going into those, more kind of mid-level roles. So that has to kind of have something to do with admission. So I'm curious how Codesmith thinks about a student's career before they're even admitted, like in the admissions process. Does that factor in?
Oh, yeah. It really isn't something that we focus on at all. I think more important than someone's, career experience before the program is one's dedication and commitment to not just their development, but also the development of other people around them. This is a far more accurate measure of how well somebody is going to do in the Codesmith program, and honestly, the industry as a whole. But I'll tell you one thing, the thing that I most enjoy about having, such a diverse set of backgrounds, professional backgrounds in the program is, Codesmith being able to facilitate this collaboration between, these like-minded individuals coming into the program that otherwise would never find themselves working together. I think about this scenario. It's actually funny that you mentioned this. I was just recently talking about this scenario, and it happened a couple of years ago. And there's obviously countless numbers of these scenarios that have happened since then. But I think because it was early on in my time being on the Codesmith team, this one has always stuck out to me. But I think about this cohort that we had in our Los Angeles immersive program, a couple years back, where you had this resident, the student in the program, Sam, who was he was a Stanford PhD student prior to coming into the Codesmith program. And working right alongside Sam, you have students or residents like Skylar, who is a 19-year-old recent high school graduate. And these two are pair programming, working on the same teams in this collaborative, kind of synergetic atmosphere, building really cool products. And I just think it's a very, special combination and atmosphere to be working in that I've never really experienced anywhere else before.
So at Codesmith, you're not necessarily looking for someone with like a specific degree or a specific like professional background, but in order to get Codesmith graduates such high salaries and like those more kind of senior jobs, you must be looking for more experienced applicants, in addition to applicants who are showing that high level of dedication. So what are those kind of core skills that you're looking for?
Yeah. This is a really good question. One that I and I'll tell you why, because I find myself talking about this often in, public workshops and things along those lines. And this is generally most people's preconceived notions when they're first introduced to Codesmith. They see the outcomes, of the program. They see the open source contributions and the developer tools that are built by the residents in the program. And they think, oh, I must have, 3 years experience programming or a computer science degree or have gone through another program in order to be successful in a program like this. And it's just fundamentally not true. So I'm glad that you specifically asked, like, what are the core pieces of what we look for? Because it really has nothing to do with like the background or the technical experience of the program. Again, like I said before, we do see about maybe a third of our cohorts come from some sort of background like that, some sort of background from, like an engineering perspective, computer science degree, other programs, et cetera. But that is by no means a requirement. A large portion of our residents come from zero technical background. But that doesn't mean that it's an easy program to get into. We set a very high bar to get into the program, but we also help people achieve that bar. That's one of the trade-offs to having such a high bar to get in is you need to be able to help guide and motivate and facilitate people getting to that level. We do that, through public workshops, our JavaScript, the hard parts series every week, intro to JS workshops, our CSX platform, which is our online learning platform for JavaScript, prep programs like JavaScript for Beginners, CS Prep, et cetera, things along those lines. But there are 5 particular capacities that the admissions team looks for, regardless of what the background is of the person that's applying for the program. Number one, core capacity or characteristic that we look for is, well, not in any specific order, but just one of them is technical communication. We've seen time and time again that there is a direct correlation between how well you can communicate through code, line by line, and how well you can work in an effective capacity with another engineer, in a team setting. Another one of the core capacities is your non-technical communication, which really just means, I don't know if I should say this on this interview or not, but really just means, are you an asshole? The software engineering industry over the last 10 years has become such a much more team and collaboration based industry. And being able to communicate effectively and empathetically is no longer this like nice to have skill set for an engineer. It is a requirement. It is a necessity in this industry. Analytical problem solving skills is another big one. I think that was number 3. Analytical problem solving skills, not how much code that you know or that you can memorize, but rather how good are you at taking large complex problems and breaking them down into more digestible bite-sized pieces, and then being able to take that bit of code that you do know and apply it in interesting ways. Let's see, that was number 3. Number 4 would be your engineering approach or best practices around engineering. So how do you structure code? How do you debug? How good are you at referencing documentation? And then finally, there is a component to this of you do need to have a certain or be at a certain level of programming or JavaScript knowledge. I don't know if I would go as far as to say just like sheer experience, because that makes people think that, they have to be an engineer before or something along those lines, but just sheer JavaScript knowledge in order to be successful in, a program like Codesmith.
And that JavaScript knowledge is something that you can get through those
exactly.
ramp up programs like CSX and
exactly
CS Prep.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Exactly right.
I love that you mentioned that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But I was just going to say, not only that, pre the program, but those 5 capacities, we have this, kind of like unique relationship with those 5 capacities in that we look for those capacities coming into the program, but it's also kind of the guiding capacities for the entire program itself. Everything about the program's pedagogy of teaching and structure and the curriculum is designed in a way to develop and facilitate the kind of upskilling of all 5 of those capacities in the program itself.
Okay, so tell us about that design of the curriculum. So once a student gets admitted into Codesmith, how does your team structure that 12 weeks that you are working with that resident to really set them up kind of for their first job?
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack here. Let's see, we'll keep it at an appropriate level of detail. There are, there's 2 main sections of the immersive program. Our P-Tree program, or our part-time remote immersive program, it's structured a little bit differently just because it goes at about the third the pace of the immersive program. But our immersive program is structured in this way. There's 2 main portions. There is a junior portion and a senior portion. The junior portion being the first 6 weeks, consider the junior portion, is focused on 2 major pieces. Number 1 is core technologies, like the core technology stack that we're teaching. And number 2, and I'll try to be as detailed as needed here. Number 2 is kind of the first part of the project phase of Codesmith. So, the first 4 weeks is dedicated to those core technologies, both in-demand technologies in the field today. So, things like React, things like Redux, things like Node, et cetera. But equally as important, the first 4 weeks dives into the kind of base fundamentals of programming. Not just relying on frameworks and libraries, but also, how is your vanilla JavaScript capacities or knowledge, vanilla JavaScript DOM manipulation, time complexity, algorithms, data structures, the classic, more computer science focused concepts or skill sets. The second part of the junior portion being the, kind of like the first part of their project phase, In your junior portion, you have 3 projects in that project phase. We call them the solo project, the scratch project, and the iteration project. Now, these projects are designed to continue the process of solidifying that core material that residents were introduced to in the first 4 weeks. But again, equally as important, it introduces them or starts to kind of build out this roadmap for best practices around working with teams of engineers. We train on things like agile development. We train on things like Scrum, code review processes, and even more, kind of advanced Git workflows. So that kind of, encompasses the junior portion. Now, the senior portion focuses on 3 other major pieces. It focuses on the open source production project. It focuses on the hiring program, which I know we've talked a lot about before in the past. And I would kind of categorize as like that third piece as being just, kind of like advanced concepts like DevOps, like, front-end optimization, like security, just slightly more advanced concepts than what was introduced in the junior portion. Now, the hiring program, I won't go into too much detail because I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more in other parts of the interview. And we've talked about it a lot before in the past as well. But the hiring program explores really all of the concepts that a grad will encounter on the job. Whiteboarding, algorithms, and system design questions, technical phone screens, even going as far as training our residents on how to negotiate multiple offers that our grads receive. Now, the production project, which is primarily open source developer tools that our engineers build, is a big building block for residents. It allows them to not only become more of an authority on a particular technology, things like React or GraphQL or Kubernetes or something along those lines, but it also provides substantial benefit to the community, which I'm particularly proud of. We have many open source projects and products that have been built out by grads that have received thousands of stars on GitHub and even awards in the past. In fact, actually, I actually just had a conversation with a team of engineers 2 nights ago that is in our LA program, one of our LA cohorts, and they're building out this tool called React Time. And a few weeks back, we found out that React Time, this tool that they're building, it's a performance and debugger tool for React. It was nominated actually for the 2020 Open Source Tool of the Year for React. And
that's awesome.
Yeah,
really
cool.
Cool.
I thought it was really interesting. It was really cool. And then even more so, I was excited because we found out about this, a couple of weeks ago. Just 2 nights ago, one of the grads reached out to the team to let us know that Dan Abramoff, who is a very predominant engineer in the industry, he's the creator of Redux, which is one of the tools that the technologies that we teach, and also a lead engineer on the React team at Facebook, reached out to them about reviewing their code and kind of talking about how impressed he was with the tool that they built. So yeah, it was pretty incredible stuff, actually.
I love when I hear people who say like nobody hires boot camp graduates, and then like the real stories are so the opposite. And in fact, like a lot of boot camp graduates are making like serious contributions to the community. So that's really cool. Yeah. And I feel like when I talk to, the alumni who I think have been the most successful, they usually say that they specialized in something or really like focused on one, maybe they didn't become an expert in those 12 weeks, but like they really focused on something in particular, and that really got them through the job search process much more easily. When you think about maybe think about a few of your residents who have landed like the highest salaried or the most senior jobs, is there something that they're doing that stands out during the immersive boot camp that kind of gets them those jobs? Or is it just that like they're all choosing to work in fintech or I don't know, is there something that stands out?
Yeah, Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring up, the point about specializing in something. Within Codesmith, we talk about this a lot actually as a concept. I don't know if I would say that this is like the thing that helps residents really get like the next level roles or jobs or whatever the case is afterwards, because this is something that all the residents within Codesmith, again, the curriculum is designed in a way to facilitate this kind of just, automatically, which is, kind of how you say to specialize. We call it becoming a T-shaped developer, meaning, if you kind of think about, a T, you think about, the top piece as being like this area that an engineer has built how do we say, a solid technical depth across many different full stack relevant software engineering technologies. So, you think about Node, you think about React, you think about vanilla JavaScript, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have a solid depth of knowledge across all of these areas, but they have one in particular that kind of makes up the stem, the kind of like the deep part of the T that they specialize in, or they become more of an authority on. And that may be GraphQL or Kubernetes or something along those lines. So, we won't go into all those details, because I do definitely think that is something that helps engineers develop themselves and show, using it as a trigger or a sign to hiring managers or just other engineers in the field, the level of sophistication and the level of problem solving that they have. But if I had to think about something that I would say really sets apart other engineers, I would say probably two things. I would say number one is autonomy. And rather, not just autonomy, I would say autonomous problem-solving abilities. We'll say it that way. And number two, being a multiplier of others, being able to develop others. So, autonomy in the sense of how much, this is how I typically like to think about it and explain it to folks, is autonomy or autonomous problem-solving abilities really being a differentiator between what sets a junior, mid, or senior level engineer apart, the differentiation there. How much does an engineering manager have to hold the hand of another engineer in order to get a feature built out or an engineering task completed? The Codesmith program is designed in such a way that residents are constantly and strategically being pushed into those challenging tech-oriented situations. And by solving those problems in the program, they grow themselves to be more autonomous engineers. And then, the other piece being a multiplier of others, AKA being able to put just as much emphasis on the development of the team around them as they do the development of themselves. So I would say those are probably the two main characteristics: autonomy and the multiplying of others.
Very cool. And thinking about kind of multiplying others just makes me think about alumni. How many Codesmith alumni are in the network now? We're talking in December 2020. So Codesmith has been graduating developers for a few years now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, and I don't have the specific numbers right off the top of mind. I would say probably somewhere in the realm of 1,200 graduates now from LA, New York, and the part-time remote immersive program.
That's amazing. How does that alumni network, how does that impact a student or a resident's experience? Are they like interacting with those alumni? Are they, giving them like warm intros at jobs, things like that?
Yeah, all of those things. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So, the program itself carves out certain, networking type events between current residents and program alumni. Like in the program itself, networking events and these types of situations between alumni and residents in the program. For instance, we have every 6 weeks, every half cycle of a cohort, we have a Q&A panel that's built into the curriculum or built into the schedule, where we have, several recent alumni that are working in the field at this point, kind of come in and do like Q&A sessions, best practices, things that they learned along the way, et cetera, et cetera. There's things like mock interviews with feedback that are set up from alumni to current resident. Lots of different situations like that. But honestly, Liz, what I would say is probably an even more, the more meaningful interactions that come from alumni are these more like natural occurrences. And I'll explain what I mean by that. To this day, one of the scenarios that I remember that really was kind of like my first major experience when I came onto the team at Codesmith that showed me just really how unique the community was. We had, it must have been close to 3 years ago now. Yeah, probably about 3 years ago now. We had our very first Codesmith, kind of resident holiday party. About 3 years ago, and we had alumni there, we had current residents there, everybody was invited to this, this big holiday party. And I remember, because I was still like new to the team, just kind of observing what was going on in this scenario. And I remember seeing an alumni exchanging contact information with a soon to be graduated senior of the program. I later, kind of talked to the alumni and I found out a lot of these details, but the reason that they were exchanging information was the alumni that I saw was currently working at ESPN, and the senior graduate or soon to be senior graduate, was ESPN had been like a dream, a career, like a dream company to work at. And the alumni was exchanging information so that he could introduce the senior to the hiring manager for that team, that engineering team that the alumni worked on, because there were some jobs that were going to be coming available in the next couple of months and, that type of thing. And I later talked to the alumni about like the whole scenario and kind of met him. And I didn't know him because, again, I was new to the team, and I met him and was just talking to him a little bit. And I asked him what cohort he had graduated from. At this time, I think we were probably somewhere in the range of like the 20th cohort in LA at the time. And me, I'm sitting here thinking like, oh, this person probably graduated a couple of cohorts ago or like within the last few months or something like that. No, this person was actually the alumni. The alumni was actually from cohort number 1 in LA, like the beta cohort for Codesmith, the very first cohort that Codesmith ever did. And I just remember being so blown away by the fact that not only was this alumni still wanting to come around and be part of the Codesmith community 3 years after he had graduated, but he was also actively helping current residents, introducing, like helping them on their job search by doing kind of these like referrals and introducing to his hiring manager. It was such a unique experience that I never, had before. It was really wonderful.
That's so cool. He sounds like a great ambassador for Codesmith. And yeah, I totally see where you're coming from. I think with a 4-year university, you kind of assume that people will stay in that alumni network. But with a 12-week program, I think, the hypothesis is that someone's there for 12 weeks and then they leave and go on to their first job and then like start their career and that's that. But we hear so many really cool stories about alumni really staying involved in the community. And I think that makes a school that really like invests in their alumni community as well is doing something right. So that's amazing. Very cool. So I know we don't want to get too deep into like exactly what goes into the career services work and career services team. If you're watching this and you're interested in that, we actually have another article on Course Report about, it's like a total deep dive into the Codesmith career services team. But Philip, maybe just tell us like how the career services team is actually working with students. Like when does that start and end? Is it like a module at the end of the curriculum, at the end of those 12 weeks, or are they starting much earlier than that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the hiring program, or the career services program, the hiring program is what we typically like refer to it as while they're in the program, actually within the 12 weeks of the Codesmith program. The hiring program officially starts in week 8 of the program. So just as they're going into their senior portion. And when I say the hiring program starts, the first kind of kickoff to the hiring program starts to focus seniors around like the development of their resume and some of the pieces that will take a few weeks to really start to solidify and get them into a good place. So it officially starts in week 8 of the program. In terms of what the hiring program focuses on, while the residents are still there, again, like I said before, and we've talked about a bit, we focus on many different facets from that a resident would be introduced to or come across in their job search. Building out a proper engineering focused resume is a big one. How to whiteboard effectively in an interview, how to answer tough technical questions in an interview. And like I said before, even negotiating salaries and, copious other pieces. But in terms of, kind of like when does that end or like what happens even after the program, the hiring support team continues to work with alumni and guide them in their processes. This happens through mock interviews, post Codesmith, post graduation, continued resume development, bi-weekly check-ins with entire cohorts of engineers, where in fact, one of our senior advisors, Eric Kirsten, he actually sits down with every cohort on a bi-weekly basis and kind of goes around one by one and offers specific guidance and attention to each resident on where their current processes are and just kind of his advice on how to handle this situation, how to handle this or what to do here, et cetera, et cetera. And that support continues forever. We don't have an end date on that. In fact, we even had a recent alumni who I absolutely adore. Is a lovely guy. His name is Cujo. He came from our New York program. He was one of our cohorts, maybe a year and a half ago, something along those lines. And unfortunately, with COVID and everything that's been going on lately, he was let go from his engineering role that he had at this company called Cecilia Health in New York. Again, just due to COVID layoffs and things like that. And he had been working there for about 6-8 months, something along those lines. And he reached out to the team for help. And again, this is about a year and a half, maybe just shy of a year and a half after he's graduated the program. And he reached out to the team, the hiring program team, for help because he was struggling a little bit with his job search. He had to kind of brush the cobwebs off and get back into the structure of doing, a job search. And the hiring support team gave him, some guidance, some resume guidance, some interview practice, some mock interviews, things along those lines. And within a couple of months, he received multiple engineering job offers. And I was actually really excited for him. He ended up
that's so cool.
He ended up accepting a full stack engineering role at IBM. So for all intents and purposes, like
all right,
even better job than
go Cujo.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, I feel like we hear about the, kind of layoffs during COVID and the unemployment, but I mean, I just continue to talk to students like that who are actually getting hired during this time, and it seems impossible, but it really isn't, especially in this industry. So, so that's fantastic. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I just want to wrap up here by asking how you feel like job outcomes have been affected by the pandemic in 2020. Where, like I said, we're talking in December, at the end of this year, and the last numbers that we heard from Codesmith was, as I mentioned in the intro, 87% of Codesmith graduates are getting full-time software engineering jobs within 6 months, and an average $115,000 a year salary. Definitely not trivial amounts there. So has that been affected at all by the pandemic in 2020?
Yeah. So the last results that were reported to CIRR, to CIRR, were the results from graduates of the program from June to December of last year, but also, the big metrics within there are recorded from January to June of this year. And kind of how did the hiring processes go for those residents or those alumni that graduated over the first 6 months of this year. So obviously we're already even stepping into, post COVID, kind of starting, February, March, like, or kind of like March timeframe, and that type of, that type of timeframe. So we do have a bit of that that's already incorporated into the last reporting numbers that are posted on SIR right now. But to kind of, answer it a little bit more in depth, like many other industries aside from engineering, when COVID first hit, we saw many companies downsizing, which unfortunately led to some graduates that were, already working in the industry, losing their jobs, like I mentioned already with Cujo, and recent grads that were just starting out in their job search, having a bit longer than normal process as companies started to slow down, their hiring processes. But I feel like as we've kind of progressed and the world, has started to realize that COVID wasn't going to be this thing that is just going to quickly pass us on by, companies needed to figure out how to survive, how to adapt. And ever since that realization, the engineering industry itself, I feel like, has bounced back in a really big way. We've been seeing the same level of incredible outcomes coming from grads and, other alumni that might have been furloughed or lost their jobs that then transitioned into, new roles and new companies. I think of, besides just Cujo, one of the other people that are, kind of top of mind, we had this graduate, Connor, from, I think was probably about the same cohort as Cujo in the New York program, who was working for Hilton Hotels for, 8-9 months or something along those lines when COVID hit. And, unfortunately, obviously the hotel business, the hotel industry wasn't, and, didn't, get skipped by COVID or anything along those lines. And he unfortunately did, his team was furloughed and he ended up losing his job. But since then, within just a few months, he's been able to successfully transition into another role, working for this really successful dev shop, actually. And I think his team is now one of the core teams working on the Best Buy e-commerce site. So you start to see like this transition from, maybe really hard hit industries, but other industries being boosted up because of that same, pandemic. And I think really when it comes down to it, Liz, is, when it comes down to COVID, when it comes down to COVID or not, companies will always be in need of strong, leadership-driven, autonomous problem solving, like we mentioned before, engineers. And I don't think that we're going to see that change anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really goes back to what you were saying at the very beginning of this Q&A, which is that software engineering is such an interesting field to get into because it's kind of industry agnostic. So if you have these skills, especially like from Codesmith, such a kind of rigorous program, when you graduate, if you go into, an industry that gets unfortunately affected by COVID, there are other industries where you can do use the exact same skill set. And it's not a huge learning curve there. So love that we kind of ended where we started. And I think that's a great place to wrap up. So thank you so much, Philip, for joining us again. I feel like we always kind of hear that, Codesmith has these high salaries and high employment rates, but it was really nice for you to get to kind of walk us through exactly how y'all do that. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, no problem at all. My pleasure, Liz. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. And if you're watching this video, then thank you for joining. If you have questions about a specific school, like how they get their outcomes or what they teach, let us know in the comments and you may see it on the next Course Report YouTube video. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
See you, everyone.